name is Brett Howard, and I live in New Jersey. I am the Director of Education of the United States Pilates Association, and I also have my own studio called the Pilates House, which is in Jersey City, New Jersey. And part of the Pilates House, we also have something called Kinder House, which is a Pilates for Children program, and we offer a variety of classes, and we offer something called Kinder Pilates, and I wanted to take the idea of using Kinder because Joseph Pilates was German, so a little play on the German. I actually started Pilates very young. I started at around the age 15 years old, and I was a dancer, and I have very hypermobile joints and was very flexible. And so I needed something to tighten me up a little bit. I also have a mild form of muscular dystrophy, so for me, my muscles atrophy at a very rapid rate, so I needed something to help keep me together more, and Pilates was a very natural way to go. And so I started in Pittsburgh, actually, and that's where I'm from. And so when I moved to New York, I studied with a woman named Wendy Amos at the Alvin Ailey School. And she trained with Kathy Grant, and that was part of our class, that was part of our curriculum. And then when I went to college, we had a studio there at SUNY Purchase, and that was headed up by Sean Gallagher, Romana Krzyzanowska. And while I was there, I decided I really, really love Pilates.
My name is Dawn Marie Ickes. I am a Pilates instructor and a licensed physical therapist. I have a private practice in Southern California called Evolve Integrative Wellness, where we combine corrective exercise methodologies, including Pilates, core line, red cord, and other corrective exercise techniques with both alternative and complementary medicine techniques and traditional physical therapy. I'm a university professor at 2 different schools where I teach comprehensive Pilates instructor training programs to both AA degree level students and clinical doctorate degree level students, as well as work in my private practice with young children all the way up through geriatric populations with a specialty focus on women's health and pediatrics.
My name is Celeste Corey-Zopich, and I live and work in Staten Island, New York. I have a very interesting entry, I guess, into Pilates, as most people have a story, but my background is in movement. I was a dancer through all of my early years, and I used to dance with a particular local company, and I did a lot of civic theater as well. But this company left when I was in high school, and at the time I ended up shifting into academics. So I went into performing arts, and then I went into academics, and I ended up working on Wall Street, of all places. Yes. And I worked there for many, many years with my academic background and my movement background. So I have both, but I worked then in the business world. So from there, I needed to leave that environment because it really wasn't who I was, and I couldn't stay in it, although I did very well. And I ended up going back to movement and dance, and that's when I got into Pilates. So I actually didn't start officially doing Pilates until I was in my 20s. And my dance background was very Martha Graham based, so when I started learning the Pilates movements, it was very, very easy and organic for me. I felt very connected to the movement, to the methodology, to everything about it. So I got into the movements when I was much older than many folks do. But from that point, I had started working in a fitness environment, and it turned out that they were really lacking in formal Pilates practice. So I was completing my training at that time and really started teaching in a community youth center.
Yes, I started Pilates for kids pretty much out of a project. My master's is in education. I got a master's in education from NYU. And when I first started NYU, I decided that I would start as a major for higher education. I didn't feel like I really wanted to teach children. I wanted to teach in the university. And so some of my coursework was for teaching K through 12. And I took the work and I realized I really, really loved this. So I decided to do all the coursework for K through 12. Even though my degree is in higher education, I've done all the coursework. And so I started to make some of my projects that would have been dance education related into Pilates education related. And I felt like it was a good fit to do it that way. And then in the end, I made my master's thesis working with Pilates for children and creating a curriculum for Pilates for children. And my curriculum was geared more for ages 4 through 10 with an emphasis on creativity. And with the curriculum, it was for both rural and urban setting, and for both private and for public schools, and also private sector. And so that's how I got involved in Pilates for children.
My first introduction to Pilates was at a very young age. When I was 13, I was a figure skater, and I sustained a back injury, and my doctor recommended that I attend physical therapy at a facility that had a Pilates instructor so that I could learn Pilates as a method of strengthening my back and potentially returning to figure skating. And quite frankly, at that time, I didn't enjoy Pilates at all. I dreaded it. I was 13 years old. I didn't quite understand what the benefits were. And I think that I was, at the time, being exposed to Pilates as an adolescent from a very adult perspective. So I did the exercises. It was very regime intensive. And then once I was finished with my rehabilitation and physical therapy, I didn't revisit it again until I was in college and teaching step aerobics in the 90s at a facility that also offered mat Pilates. I took a couple of classes, was immediately intrigued, really enjoyed what it did for my body and how I felt. But then I, shortly thereafter, got into graduate school and was consumed for 2.5 years in getting my master's degree in physical therapy. So Pilates was again on the back burner. It wasn't until after I graduated from PT school and had been practicing for a few years that I'd been reintroduced to it again by a physical therapist who was using it as a tool for some of the rehabilitation exercises in her practice. As a result of that exposure to it, once again, I was fascinated by how quickly my body was able to adapt to the exercises based on the Pilates method to stabilize me from a rehabilitation standpoint. And as a physical therapist, I couldn't believe that something so intriguing and so simple and yet so interesting could have such profound effects on integrating my whole body, not just the part that was hurt. So I fell in love with it, decided probably within 3 months of that experience to start my training to become a Pilates instructor, to really understand the depth of the work on a completely different level now as a rehabilitation person, to explore the benefits of Pilates from that perspective, but also wanting to stay true to what Pilates really was, as opposed to, well, how can I change it for rehab? I really wanted to be able to come to it with a strong foundation of Pilates and then see how it blended into my own theories and philosophies and methodologies of treatment and corrective exercise. So fast forward to my involvement with the PMA board. I was a founding board member of the PMA back in 2001, and I believe it was after a board meeting that we had had our second year, which was in 2002, that this constant theme kept being revisited by the president of the board at the time, Kevin Bowen, which was we had all these administrative things to do. We were working on creating a certification exam. We were trying to standardize certain elements of the profession. And yet we'd have these meetings and he'd say, let's not forget that Joe wanted us to teach children. And being that I had a background in pediatric physical therapy and a background in research, I kept saying, well, in order to do that, we really have to substantiate clinically the benefits of Pilates and try to find ways to bridge the information and the value to create a safe opportunity for students to participate in it and to safeguard ourselves. We knew Pilates as a method of exercise, a philosophical method of living your life through whole body health, whole body movement, and productive, relevant breathing with our activities. And yet, we wanted to apply the same thing to children, which again, based on my background in pediatrics, I knew had different issues that would need to be addressed. So in moving forward with that, it was a very broad idea. And my initial response was, let's pick a very narrow group so that we can try to gather as much data in pediatric exercise and movement as possible. Then we can make guidelines and applications based on that and test the benefits, show that it works, show what we all inherently know, and then be able to go out and share that with the rest of the world.
After I gave birth to my son, I then started working with children, but only at the point that he was in preschool. So that's when I started a little bit at a time doing little bits of programming for them. Each year that he was in school, I would go in and I would work with his class and his group and each of the age groups that he was in. So as I was doing that, I became more and more interested in the overall population of working with youth, and I had been working, as I said, with a largely adult post-rehabilitative population. So it was a very, very big contrast in the type of work, which was really exciting, and my son and his classmates loved it. So when I had joined the organization, the PMA organization, I was just a teacher. I was a teacher trainer. I had my own teacher training program. I was working with others in the field, but then I came into the organization of the Pilates Method Alliance. I started coming to the conferences that the organization put on for the profession. And at that point, Dawn Marie was very steeped in the Pilates in the Schools initiative, and she was working on the board of directors, and she was promoting the initiative. And I said that would be a really great way to get more involved in working with the youth population. So I started doing one of the pilot programs in my local area, and I worked in my son's school, and my daughter now, I have two children now, so I have an 11-year-old boy and a 6.5-year-old girl. And when he was in kindergarten and first grade, I began going into the school setting and working with the formal pilot program. So I actually followed the directives of the formal pilot and did 10-week programs for multiple age groups. So I would do the lower grades, but the pilot was really for the 5th and 6th grade in the US, 5th and 6th grade age groups. So with that, I would go into the school and I would work with each of those grades for this 10-week period of time. And the results were amazing. I knew they would be because I believe in Pilates, I believe in the method. And I also was very, very connected to the idea that Joseph Pilates wanted to first educate the child. So having worked with adults, beginning to work with the youth population, thinking about Joseph Pilates' vision of first educating the child and wanting to really change the world with his method, because if everybody could have a body that functioned and was able to do natural movements with ease starting at a young age and moving onward, then people would be much better able to live in their day-to-day life. So I got to see that with my older clientele as well as the young clientele, and it just became very inspiring for me personally. With that, I wanted to get more involved with the organization, and I put in to be on the board of directors. I actually had sent in, they were made a call for new board members. And with my background in business and finance and my background in academics and my background in movement, it was not just being a Pilates teacher that made me want to get involved in the organization.
I joined this project by, I actually joined a little bit late. So the project had already been going on for a little while. And it was probably in about 5 years into it. And I was contacted actually by Celeste, and we had met probably about a year prior to this. And we had talked about Pilates for children, and we had talked about my interest in working with children and also working with the PMA more. And so she asked me to be a part of the Pilates in Schools project. And so that time it was called PITS. And one of the missions of PITS was to create a manual of guidelines that would be that would show how to work with children safely and effectively. And so that's how I initially got started with the project. And then I brought on my knowledge and my expertise of curriculum building, and that's pretty much how I started with the project and got more involved with the project of the manual. Now it's called the PYP, Pilates Youth Program, And the reason why we decided to make it the Pilates Youth Program is because we wanted to offer to more people than just in a school setting. So we wanted it for the entire youth. And so my contribution was at first to help write some of the exercise chapters. And so I focused on the 4th through 7th grade part of the chapters. And then we figured that we wanted to develop the manual a little bit more. And so we've added chapters on to it. And so I'm also helping with working with it in schools in cognition. And then also I did contribute the curriculum. And so the curriculum was going to be an appendix, and now the curriculum is going to be the 3rd section of the book. And we felt this was important because with getting it into schools, a lot of people think it's much easier than it really is. And so when I came on, I said, well, if you wanted to get into schools, you're going to have a curriculum, because schools want to make sure that you're not going to put a child at risk. So they want to make sure that there's research that has been done that supports your curriculum, that there's data there, that there's a philosophy, that there's a rationale, and they also want to see that what type of goals, learning objectives, outcomes are going to be met, that the children are going to learn, and also that you're not going to put them at risk. So we decided that it's very important, and originally, like I said, it's going to be part of the appendix, but we realized that it was a very important part of the project, and so we decided to put it into more the main part of the manual.
And I left a board meeting and had shared with the board that, you know what, I'm just going to go home and do it in my daughter's school. So I left that board meeting with an inkling of an idea, went back to my daughter's school, and determined that I was just going to do a quick pilot study, see if we could find some objective measurements, some quantitative measurements, pre and post, after a 10-week program. And that way we could at least substantiate trying to spend more time, energy, and money moving forward in supporting the structure for the program. So we participated in the program. I did some research, found some objective measurements. It was very, very grassroots. We did the program, and then as we were approaching the end of the 10-week period, we had been invited to come to Washington, D.C. to speak with a lobbying group about potential ways of getting more government involvement, more awareness of potentially putting some of these programs into Miami-Dade County. We had an appointment with Congressman Ickes and Congressman Ickes' chief of staff. And in the process of preparing for that, on a whim, I asked a client of mine, would you mind reviewing my PowerPoint? I'm going to Washington, D.C. I'm talking about this Pilates for Kids thing, which all my clients were aware of because I was constantly talking about it. And he said, you can't show up in D.C. with a PowerPoint. Are you crazy? You need to have a DVD. And I looked at him and said, how on earth am I going to be able to do that? His name is Jeremy Wallace. I think it's really important that we give him a lot of credit because he actually created the DVD and a lot of the videos online that created a very viral interest for a long period of time that really drove what was then to become the Pilates in the Schools pilot program. The most significant aspect of that experience for me personally, in addition to the fact that he showed up with a crew of 3 of wonderful guys that were so excited to be there and so interested in learning about what was happening in the minds of these kids because they'd been working with adults, but what was so significant was he filmed the project, the program, what we did, and then afterwards he asked each of the children, he said, I'm going to go by each one of you, and I'd like you to share with me one thing that you feel Pilates has done to change, during this experience. And as we listened, after child, there were 36 students in the initial pilot, we started hearing a consistent theme of when I got stressed, I remembered my Pilates breathing and I did it and I felt myself getting calmer. So the kids were actually making the correlation between the effect on their mind and body connection. And the interesting part of that is my curriculum, my structure was, because of my background in research, very specific. I only went and taught exercises. I did not talk about philosophy. I did not talk about the importance of breath beyond doing the exercises and executing them, because I wanted it to be very specific to any teacher could come in and teach a set of exercises in this manner, and then we could really evaluate what were the body changes. So it wouldn't really be dependent on, does that teacher have a background in anatomy? Does that teacher have a background in teaching children? Does that teacher use all these other wonderful tools that we access as instructors? What if they just came in and taught a baseline class? How can we assess those measurements first? And then we can start exploring some of the other options.
And at that point, I was nominated to the board. And Dawn Marie had come off, or was just coming off the board. There was a little bit of a gap between our time on the board. And I was able to, from having worked in one of the pilot programs, I was able to work as one of the committee members for the Pilates in the Schools Committee for a short period of time in this intermediary phase. And then the program had come to a bit of a standstill. And the pilots were really, they'd been going on, and then they were kind of done, and they were gathering the research, but having a direction of where we could go at that point was something that needed to be decided from the organization standpoint. So they asked me, once I was on the board, because I had the experience and I had worked with Dawn Marie's pilot programs, if I would be interested in taking on the project from the organization standpoint. And I said, sure, because I was already steeped in it and very passionate about the potential of what it could be. So it was sort of redesigning the committee at that point, trying to rethink what the vision of the program could be so that we could actually have community outreach on a very broad scale, because one of the missions of the organization is community outreach. As a 501c3, as a nonprofit organization, that's one of our missions, is to be able to reach the community, not only of Pilates teachers, but the community at large. So what came from that was the idea of developing a formal manual and curriculum for all youth, ages in the US, kindergarten to 12th grade, if you're talking school ages, or 5 to 18 years old, 5, 6 to 18, 19 years old. And that was really the starting point, and then determining what had to be done to get that together. So the manual idea was birthed or created at that point. And then the task was, okay, what's the content going to be? Who's going to participate in writing this thing, and how is it going to get done, and what's going to happen with it once it is done? And we didn't really know all of the answers to those questions. So the first step was sort of reforming a committee, and I had the great pleasure of having Tracy Coe willing to participate in the committee that I was forming, and she had worked on the original pilots as well with Dawn Marie in the California area, and I was working in the New York area. So we had mutual experience to bring to the table, and she had practical knowledge to bring. And then it was a meeting in probably 2010, I think we were in Dallas, or 2009, at a summit meeting of the PMA where Brett Howard was there, and I was able to meet with him and talk to him for the first time. And in that conversation, I realized from his background, not only his passion in working in Pilates, but he had a background in education, and he was working with early childhood populations and other inner city school area populations, working Pilates for youth. So the concept of having a formal curriculum as a part of this project was really necessary for it to have the proper breadth and scope for outreach. That was one of the objectives. So it's to make a manual of guidelines, and the manual of guidelines would include exercises that were not only age appropriate, but also developmentally appropriate for different segments for teachers within the Pilates repertoire. So we picked out exercises from the Pilates repertoire that would be appropriate. And then it was the idea of having the physiological background and knowledge for why we would be making these decisions, why we don't work with the youth population the same way we work with the adult population. I think that's the key. The key is the project is multifaceted, so we need to get a few messages out. One is that working with the youth population is absolutely not the same as working with the adult population, but above and beyond that, working with the youth population within the youth population is different depending upon the age group and the developmental stage of those, of those ages. So that became a very critical component to try to incorporate. And then the curriculum meant that if we have this curriculum as part of this project, not only could we have this manual of guidelines where any teacher could use it, but people who did want to go into schools would now have something tangible that they could provide a school system to actually make that step. Because the US school system is very variable. So the mandates are very variable from East Coast to West Coast, from district and region and state, and there's no national or federal mandate that's really standard that they have in other countries. So for teachers to want to get into schools, that's one area, but we also want people to be able to work in the private sector. So we want them to be able to work in studios, in dance studios, sports centers, youth centers, private schools, public schools, after-school programs. So there are many different facets. So the idea of the project is how can we best outreach to the entire community with this project and for this population. So that's been the driving force of putting it together, making it cohesive that way.
Joseph Pilates, one of his missions was to work with children and to have children do his work. And he wrote a book called Your Health. And within Your Health, there's a chapter called First Educate the Child. And one of the lines that I really love in that is that in childhood, habits are formed early on, good or bad. So then why not then focus on the formation of good habits, thus preventing to correct bad habits. And so I think that's why it's very important, because if you create a strong base, you can really grow and build something very amazing on top of that base. But you really do need to have a base to start off with. And one of my mentors, her name is Lolita San Miguel, and we were having a conversation once, and she said, I really am glad that you are focusing on children and trying to get Pilates to the youth, because I think it's a shame that children learn about math and they learn about science, they learn reading, but people never really learn how to live in their own body. And that's a real shame. And I think, touching on what Joseph Pilates said and touching on what Lolita said, that if people really had a better sense of self-embodiment, that a lot of problems later on in life wouldn't happen.
A very important goal for myself is to eventually see that this guide, this collection of tools, is able to assist individuals who work with high-risk youth, whether it's high-risk teens or high-risk preteens, but these groups that don't have access to gyms, don't have access to a lot of educational support in their educational environment, but maybe have one or two people who are committed to bringing a movement experience to them that can equip them with tools that can alter the trajectory of their life. That's really where I would love to see this program evolve and be able to move towards. And I think the first step is educating and sharing all that we've learned. The experience of working with Celeste Zopich and Brett Howard, and how much I've learned from each of their unique experiences and collective work and efforts and participation has completely changed the way I envision where this can be. I used to see it as being something that was here and excitably here, and now it's truly, if before it was sky's the limit, now it feels like solar system is the limit as to where this program and where it's not even the program as much as it's the information about the program that I think can now be shared globally and really empower people of all walks of life, not just Pilates instructors, but possibly physical education teachers, classroom teachers, to know that there are options out there for their students and to know how Pilates could help their students. And then maybe they'll reach out to a local Pilates instructor and say, I'd love to have you come into my class, and I'd like to do an objective measurement. I'd like to see if my test scores change. I'd like to see if the stress level of my students change if I have this teacher come in for 10 weeks. I think that would be an amazing opportunity to bridge the gap that we're now seeing between education and physical activity in a lot of different environments, and also just spreading the word about the positive impact that this work can have for all different ages of youth.
So the age groups that we've identified are the prepubescent, pubescent, and postpubescent, right? So what does that mean, right? The manual is called Teaching Pilates to Children and Adolescents. Children are ages generally 5 to 13, which includes the prepubescent age group and then goes into starting the pubescent age group just a bit. And then adolescents are generally after puberty, and they've gone, in puberty to after puberty. So we have these middle age groups. So the prepubescent has two categories. The early childhood category, which is 5 to 8 years old generally. Then the second part of prepubescent, we call it the magic window. It was actually a term that Dawn Marie came up with when she was doing the pilots, because that was the age group that she focused on. And it's called the magic window. And this age group really is from ages 9 to 12, approximately. And they have this very specific developmental phase that they're going through. So even though they're still prepubescent, that's part of the appeal, is that they're not early childhood, but they've reached neurological maturity, which comes about the ages of 7 and 8. And then they have not had the hormonal shifts that cause the skeletal and muscular changes. So they're really at this beautiful, beautiful time to introduce an exercise modality like Pilates, which is fantastic for all of the age groups, but this particular age group is really sort of ripe and primed to take in the information on multiple levels in their system in a little bit more of a creative way, but also a little more of a formal way that they can practice some of the exercises that are age appropriate and lead to healthy habits for life, which is really Joseph Pilates' vision. He wanted well-being and quality of life. That was part of his drive and his motivation and his method. So by creating the habits early on, it's also something that he described in his book, Your Health, his chapter, First Educate the Child. He talks to children being able to run and jump and play and climb and push and pull and do all of the exercises that they would in Mother Nature, so to speak. But because we live in a contrived world, often children don't have the opportunity to experience their world that way, and it's a very important part of their development. So without that, having something, even though it's an instituted program, keeping those concepts in mind will enable natural development and growth, both physically, mentally, and emotionally.
I have to say that this project has been an amazing project for me to work on. I have thoroughly enjoyed working with Celeste Zopich, and I have enjoyed working with Dawn Marie Ickes and with Tracy Coe and everyone who has been a part of this project. It's really amazing to see it grow. Joseph Pilates, what he talked about, he thought Pilates was there to improve quality of life. And so it's very important to start with the young. And if young people know how to live in their own bodies, and they know what their bodies are telling them, they know if they have an injury, how to work with that, that in itself is improving quality of life.
The manual is really designed for the Pilates instructor to be able to not rethink their own philosophy of teaching, but to enhance whatever their philosophical background and foundation for how they teach the methodology of Pilates and the lineage they follow, to take that and be empowered to understand which considerations they need to layer into the current curriculum that they follow and do within their programs, studios, etc., to be able to design curriculum and programming for all ages, if that's their goal, or to know how to find what particulars are specific for certain age groups and why they're specific for certain age groups, why particular program design ideas are appropriate for younger children that may not be appropriate for high school children, from not only an anatomical and physiological perspective, but also from an emotional and cognitive development perspective. And that's really our goal, is to provide education and additional information that isn't currently out there. We've really tried to bridge the gap between the current research that exists around the different principles of Pilates and how do we draw a correlate between the research that exists that supports those principles like breathing, concentration, etc. We know those principles, and we know there's research to support mindfulness and breath coordinated with movement and how that impacts the body. So what we've tried to do is really take all of the information and research that's out there that supports these foundational principles of Pilates so that we can show that actually we have proof that Pilates as a method of movement, exercise, and integrative wellness is really effective for young people and can have profound benefits on their entire system.